Star Trek makes a cheeky call-out against Spock and his many movie variants. Few characters in science fiction carry the mythic weight of Spock. Leonard Nimoy's half-Vulcan officer defined logic and restraint for generations of fans, while later interpretations, from Zachary Quinto's reboot Spock to Ethan Peck's younger version on Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, have ensured the character's enduring presence. Yet, as Star Trek continues to evolve, the franchise occasionally pokes fun at its own legacy, and recently, Spock himself found himself the target of a surprisingly cheeky meta call-out. For decades, Spock has been the franchise's anchor, but also one of its most reinterpreted characters. He's been resurrected from death, rewritten across timelines, sent back in time to reboot the franchise, and reimagined in alternate realities. At this point, there may be more versions of Spock across the Star Trek multiverse than there are Klingon foreheads. That makes him ripe for gentle ribbing, and Star Trek, never shy about self-awareness, has leaned into this fact with a wink and a smirk. The burden of being Spock. When Nimoy first played the character in 1966, Spock was envisioned as the alien outsider, a figure who could stand apart from humanity and observe it critically. Over time, however, he became far more than that, a cultural icon, a fandom touchstone, and eventually the very essence of Star Trek's philosophy of balance between logic and emotion. The movies built on this idea, but they also twisted Spock into increasingly dramatic situations. The Wrath of Khan killed him in one of cinema's most emotional farewells, only for the search for Spock to resurrect him through some convenient Vulcan mysticism. The voyage home turned him into a fish-out-of-water comic presence, still adjusting to his rebirth. Later films continued to use him as the franchise's moral compass, even as the timeline fractured and shifted around him. By the time Quinto's Spock entered the picture in J.J. Abrams' reboot films, fans had grown used to the idea that there was no single definitive Spock. Instead, there were many variations, all layered on top of each other like an ever-expanding Vulcan tapestry. It's this surplus of Spocks that modern Star Trek found too tempting not to comment on. Lower Decks, the master of the meta call-out. The most recent jab came courtesy of Star Trek. Lower Decks, the animated series that thrives on playful irreverence while still celebrating canon. Lower Decks has often leaned into Star Trek's quirks, the endless shuttlecraft crashes, the technobabble solutions, and the recurring holodeck malfunctions, but its sharpest humor often comes when it turns the lens toward the franchise's larger-than-life icons. In one sly moment, Spock becomes the butt of the joke, with a pointed reference to how many versions of him exist across the movies. The show winks at the audience by suggesting that Starfleet cadets, historians, and maybe even the crew themselves have trouble keeping track of which Spock did what in which timeline. Did the Wrath of Khan Spock die nobly, or did he live through the Genesis device? Was the Kelvin timeline Spock the same one who reunited with Kirk, or was he an alternate? The line blurs so much that even Lower Decks treats the whole thing as a running gag. It's not mocking Spock so much as it's acknowledging the near-impossible task of keeping his legacy neatly categorized. Spock has become so central to Star Trek's storytelling that he can't help but be rewritten again and again, sometimes in contradictory ways. A cheeky nod, but also a tribute. Importantly, the joke doesn't come across as dismissive. If anything, it's affectionate. Spock is so beloved that his many cinematic reinventions are impossible to ignore, and by making the call-out, Star Trek acknowledges the shared confusion of longtime fans who've lived through every reinterpretation. It's a moment of solidarity, as if the franchise itself is saying, yes, we know there are too many Spocks, but you love him, and so do we. That balance of cheek and reverence is something modern Star Trek has gotten good at. While other franchises sometimes struggle with their legacy characters, either clinging to them too tightly or discarding them altogether, Star Trek thrives on reinterpretation. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy were rebooted for the Abrams films without replacing the originals. Pike was rediscovered and expanded into a lead role on Strange New Worlds. Even when the jokes land at Spock's expense, they only underline how essential he remains. Why Spock endures? So why does Spock keep coming back? Why not let the character rest, as so many others have? The answer lies in what Spock represents. He embodies the tension between logic and emotion, science and humanity, destiny and free will. Those themes never stop being relevant, and every new actor who takes on the role brings a different nuance to them. Nimoy played Spock as quietly tormented, Alu,